Okay, wrong. We own, I think. Good evening, ladies and gents. It is a full on Thursday situation, which means you know what time it is, hopefully. Okay, so we've been on a topic this entire month, with which we will continue to talk about today. Um, Particularly, I mean, it could be a person of any color, okay? But if you're a black person specific, um, you probably have a favorite church song. You may not have been to church in years, but you have a church song. You had a memory of sitting with your grandma, your nana, your aunties. You got deacons that done snatched you up when you was acting up. You've been in Easter plays, Christmas plays. I mean, pick a thing. Okay, you might have had an Easter speech. You got all kinds, okay, of memories, and that is the unifying power of what we call the Black Church. We will talk about why that is called the Black Church a little later. But anywho, that's kind of what's going on today. We have been in a really cool series for Black History Month. Happy Black History Month. Wakanda Forever for the entire diaspora. It's been a great month. One Love came out. It's a great time. Anyway, listen, we are talking about the Black Church today. If that sounds like something that's interesting to you, we're doing you know how we've been doing. We've been doing a deep dive into the history and coming up to the present and seeing how all of this connects to generational wellness. So if you're with it, please stick around. This episode is for you.
Hi, I'm Pam Williams, a mother.
And I'm Jessica E. Williams, a daughter. And this is a mother and a daughter truthful chat, where we discuss our 35-year multi-layered relationship.
We've been through so many ups and downs. Not only are we family, but we're business partners in the high-stress world of event planning and production for short films.
We've also shared the same therapist for over 10 years. What some people call codependence, we call collaboration.
So join us as we share stories from our lives,
have candid conversations with other mother-daughter duos,
and shed light on the roller coaster ride of being a woman while raising a woman.
All right, y'all. You know what time it is. Cups up, clink. Okay. Welcome to Truthful Chats. If this is your first time with us, welcome. If you are coming back, welcome back. You know what I mean? Um, I know you guys are probably wondering where Pam is, but I'll bring her in. Okay, we're setting a stage, we're setting a mood, we're setting a vibe. Okay, we're doing things a little different, and that's on purpose. Okay, so if you're new here, Truthful Chats is our weekly podcast show under our greater moniker and banner, and really life mission, if we will, which is create generational wellness. If you've never heard that term before and you're like, what does that mean? No worries, we made it up. Wherever you're watching this video, there should be a description or something below to give you all the tea on creating generational wellness. And again, as we say every week, if you hear the term in the streets and it's not coming from our mouths, nuck if you buck. Right? We don't condone violence, but sometimes there's a time for it. Anyway, here at Create Generational Wellness, we have a theme of the month. And then a weekly truthful chat is where we unpack that theme just a little bit. So as I've said numerous times, it is still the most wonderful time of the year here at Create Generational Wellness. Because it's Black History Month, I told you all the things have been happening. It's been a quiet, low-key Black History Month, but it's been great, okay? Beyonce done got into the country space, which is sort of like a dur. People are mad about it, but they can stay mad. Like we all know country music is Black music. We talked about all these things. Anyway, it's still February. Our theme is living. And today's episode is, of course, the living Black history, the evolution of the church. Okay. So I know. People like, yo, where's Pammy? What's going on with Pammy? Pammy is still in Texas. Okay. Real talk. It's actually her birthday tomorrow. So we're going to take some time to shout her out on that. But today is a very special day. Okay. Because as the illustrious, the brilliant, the wonderful Kirk Franklin has said, we wanted a little help for this one. Okay, we needed a little help. It was like we could have just prepared normally like we do for the episode, and we did a little of that. Okay, but when you have greatness amongst you, and you can call that greatness to come help you out, then that's what you're gonna do. Okay. So we have delayed Cammie's entrance just a bit because I wanted to make sure we set the stage, all right, for this great help. Okay, we have the first ever. This is huge. We've been talking about this for months, but it's happening today. We have the first guest ever on the Truthful Chats podcast. Okay. She is a native of Detroit, Michigan, stand up, D Town. Okay. Um, she has multiple degrees from multiple schools. I'm not even going to really name all of them. It's a lot. The most important one, even though they're all important to her because it's all blood, sweat, and tears, but the most important one is a doctor of ministry degree, okay, a doctor, all right, at the Wesley Theological Seminary in DC. She is an AKA. I have no dog in that fight, but I respect and appreciate the Divine Nine. So stand up and shout out to the pink and green. Um, she is a brilliant songwriter, arranger, musician, vocalist, former actress, and ordained minister. Okay, that means she's ultra qualified to be a part of this discussion. Okay, because don't nobody have no spiritual degrees or no nothing I can hang on the wall. I'm a black person of faith. But she's an ordained minister in the Christian Methodist Episcopal Church and the current pastor of the historic, you have to say historic in the name, the historic Carter Metropolitan CME Church in Fort Worth, Texas, okay, formerly Mexico. Most and even more importantly than all that, okay, we done gave you credentials, accolades. Well, I'm not hyped her up, okay. But more importantly, she is actually our blood family member, okay. She is my mother's niece, my cousin, but like that cousin big sister combination. It's just a lot of lines being crossed, but we are actually blood family. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for Dr. Valencia Edner, and of course, everyone's favorite mother from the dynamic duo, Pam Williams. Yes, pick
We have
cups
cups.
up.
We miss with you.
No, it was fine.
Here.
It was fine. We were trying to set the vibe. I want to make sure that the introduction was correct, everything. I didn't want people to be distracted, like, who is that sitting right there? So now they know. They have context. All right. Let's get into it. Okay. As we were preparing for today's episode, as we prepare for all episodes, I think the theme that kept like sticking out to me about the Black church is that it's always been a place to imagine freedom and practice, or at least try to practice getting to equality, right? I think this is like a little dance, I think, of um, using church and spirituality to try to attain some sort of freedom based on the conditions of our people in this country. Does everyone agree with that? Are there thoughts on that? Does that sound like crazy? I feel like everything I read, that's kind of what they were saying. Freedom is the notion of the day. Y'all there? Y'all frozen? Y'all there? I told you, the technology. All right, we'll see if they'll come on back here. Yeah, that freedom is really the goal. I think that, we're gonna do what we've been doing, right? We're gonna sort of take a trip back in the time, okay, and come forward because I think there's some things we definitely need to discuss around the church, particularly the Black church, which I feel is, and some people don't like that term. I think we can start there. Let's talk about the term. So the term Black church actually evolved from the phrase Negro church, which I think we all can agree that that's problematic. But at the time, it was not. And so it's actually coined based on a pioneering sociological study by the African American Protestants at the turn of the century. And I think W.E.B. Du Bois is involved in some form or fashion, as he was in a lot of things at that time because he was a premier thought leader. So it's more so of a thing of like, I guess black people at that time was like, we're not really feeling this Negro church moniker that y'all got going on. So the black church was adopted instead. Let me see. Y'all back?
We're
Yes.
back.
We are.
Okay, good. It's a little choppy,
We
but we
did
doing it. All right.
a few, we we did a couple of little techie things over here. We think we're good.
Oh, that's good. I wasn't really getting into it heavy. I just had talked about where the term black church came from because,
Hmm.
some people feel that type of way about it. I don't know if y'all want to add to that. I just said it was based on the study. I think W.E.B. Du Bois is involved somehow in coining that phrase, but I don't know, MV, if you have any more
It it
insight into that.
emerged. It emerged as time and identity changed.
Hmm.
It
You mean
emerged
us as
us as
going from
going from
Negroes to
color to
color to
Negro to
okay.
as identity
Yeah,
changed. It took on a stronger. The Black Church became a stronger moniker.
got it.
It was choice as opposed to placed upon you, and
Copy that. Okay.
and it seemed to encompass the full scope of the experience. So
Got
the
it. Because
Black
we're
Church,
not a monolith. Yeah,
right?
we're not a monolith as a people. And so I think that does feel a little more like an all inclusive
Yeah.
umbrella
Mm-hmm.
instead of just being, and Negro just sounds like whoever you're talking
Negro.
to. You know what I mean?
We related to that.
It sounds like Nuck if you buck is in order. The Negro church,
Yeah,
like
the
it
Negro
don't
Church.
sit right. It don't sit right.
Yeah.
Cool. Uh, okay, so what we've been doing, just to catch you up, Avi, thank you for joining us today and
Thank you for having me.
making us look smarter than we are. So we've been trying to really talk about, um, especially for Black History Month, like making it clear that our history as a people doesn't start at the transatlantic slave trade.
Correct.
I know that gets under a lot of people's skin. I don't think we should ever stop talking about slavery personally,
Absolutely.
especially when people try to like, remix it. Um, and we have been talking about the fact that white supremacy is more of a transformer than a transformer. So I think we'll probably toe those lines as we talk about it in relation to the church.
Mm-hmm.
But we always try to start with like a pre-slavery
Mm-hmm.
context. Do you have anything that you could give us along the lines of like what Africans were doing before? Even though we know white people also colonized Africa, so it's not like we've ever really been able to avoid white
But
supremacy.
never Ethiopia. And
Get
so
into it.
therefore, it's important to know that the Ethiopian eunuch, which Philip had a conversation
Okay,
with
I know that
long
story.
before Paul went to Europe with Christianity, that Ethiopian eunuch took Christianity back to Africa. So African Christianity predates
Oh, hold on. Say that one more
Macedonia
time. Y'all were breaking up just a little bit. I want
when
to make
Paul
sure
got to
people really get
Macedonia and to Europe.
Well, that's
So
deep.
that's important for us to know
Sorry, say
that
it one more time. You was
melanin
breaking up
folk
just a little
had
bit.
Christianity
Before
before
Paul and them.
before Paul. Remember, Philip is earlier. Yeah.
Oh,
Uh
okay.
Now,
We got the sound. It's fine. We
so
got the
Philip,
sound bite, which was Philip predates Paul because Philip
right,
was actually
a disciple,
technically amongst the 12. Okay,
right,
so that means black people had a direct relationship to Christianity prior to the whites coming on the continent,
absolutely.
which also makes sense having just seen One Love and the whole Bob
the
Marley situation and the
Rastafari.
Rastafari, like them all also claiming that identity coming out of the lineage of David and all that kind of stuff. So
Absolutely.
there is a lot to suggest that this isn't necessarily the white man's religion. I get how it gets convoluted once we get to the Americas, but I think it's cool to know that like
But that's the
Christianity
way.
was in Africa.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Before the Europeans,
Yeah.
which is dope. Mhm. Okay, so
Now, of
that's
course,
not to say,
it gets
mhm,
skewed. It gets skewed
of
once they
course.
get to America, but Christianity in its purest sense was in
Uh,
Africa long before it got to Europe. Mhm.
like most things, black people was on it
Yeah,
before white people was on it.
yeah. Mhm.
It's really
That's
what
what I said. You're
that
right.
boils down to.
Mhm.
And there we go.
Um,
There's a little more Black history.
there we go. And then I think I was reading today they were saying like at least from the slaves that we know they took uh from West Africa, a lot of them they were converting them under Catholicism, particularly the Spanish, I think. We like to
Mhm.
leave them out of the slavery conversation, but I don't.
Right.
Everybody's like, the
Right.
British, the British. I said, no, the Spaniards was there first.
Absolutely.
Um, and so they were, a lot of slaves were being converted and baptized prior to getting on the ship. Whether that was, did they even really, if they even really knew what that meant? I mean, at this point, you just been kidnapped and you disoriented, and these people had already tortured you and abused you. They singing hymns whilst being rapists and doing all kind of barbaric things,
Absolutely.
and they found you on a boat. So, you know, you are a Christian in a colonial sense, but I don't know that that means anything for your heart, mind, emotion, personhood. Like, do you even care about any of this? And
Jess,
it's, yeah.
I'm sorry. What was that movie we saw? Not The Woman King, but about the other queen. Started with the N or something like that, where she was in negotiations with the Spaniards, and part of the negotiation
Oh
Yeah.
yeah.
was that she had to become Catholic. You
Mhm.
remember?
Yeah, I can't think of her name. I'll have to Google it. But it is on
Right.
Netflix. It's part of the Queen series that Jada Pinkett Smith narrates. But maybe I could look it up before this is over.
Okay.
But yeah. And Zinga, I think is her name.
And Zinga,
And
yeah.
Zinga, yeah, that is her name.
Yeah.
So she
So
became, like you're saying, she just became Catholic because it was part of the negotiation
political move,
with the
yeah.
king. It was a
Right.
political move. It wasn't necessarily a move of the heart.
Mhm. Which I think is important to point out. That people were really being indoctrinated on purpose. Um, but that doesn't have anything to do with like the root of Christianity. And I think it's interesting. I don't, I would assume no slaves were taken from Ethiopia because I think they just
No, no,
would have
no,
known better.
no,
Oh, they were? No, no,
no,
no.
they were not.
Yeah. So I would be, I mean, there's no way to like, figure this out. But if Africans had prior knowledge of Ethiopian Christianity, if there was a little confusion once they got to the Americas about what this version of Christianity was, which is very much about subservience, and of course you're keeping people from reading. So
Control.
there's a lot of things that they do not know because they cannot know. They don't have access to know. So I think it was also interesting. I think in this period um, that they talk about how once slaves were able to read or once people were introduced to the faith, like when you talk about like a Nat Turner, right, or Sojourner Truth, like that, even though there's this parallel track of white Europeans telling you that Christianity means to submit and obey your master and
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
all of that kind of stuff. That for Black people who have an understanding of Christianity in a different way during this time, it becomes a level of subversion. It becomes a place for people to come and congregate to make escape plans and create songs that are able to translate information about our desire to be free, our need to be free,
The
um,
way to be free,
the way to be free.
follow the drinking gourd,
Yeah.
whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So there's a tradition. You could probably, I mean, you could definitely talk about this more, MV, especially since you are a musician too. But the use of slave
Worship.
songs and
Mm-hmm.
hymnals and like that whole tradition that gospel
Yeah.
comes from, but that actually had a very subversive root that there
Yeah.
these two different sides of Christianity can exist at the same time.
In the Brush Harbor. So the Brush Harbor was that place where they were allowed to congregate because there was a misconception, like there still is, that wherever we are, that when we're singing and when we're dancing, that's just us having a good time. And what
Mhm.
ended up happening was in the Brush Harbor, and many of those, if you remember Sugg in beloved. So was a prime example of a Brush Harbor preacher. She was a preacher woman, and so no one ever thought about her being the in Toni Morrison's Beloved, being the person who was moving people in the direction of freedom. But they messed up when they started teaching them the stories
of the Bible.
Of the Bible.
Right.
Because
Exodus
in those stories came
freedom.
Came a liberation spirit, a desire for freedom. Because if you tell me this is where my faith should reside, then if my faith is with this, then the same one that delivered this one will deliver me. So you get
the Israelites from the Egyptians.
You got the Israelites from the Egyptians, Daniel in the lion's den. You got the 3 Hebrew boys in the fiery furnace. So what you taught as control, they saw as
liberation.
Now this has me. That's the interesting point, right? Because we've talked about this before on this podcast, but probably one of my favorite scenes. It comes from 12 Years a Slave, and it's not Benedict Cumberbatch, but the other white man in the movie. I don't remember. But he's like actively trying to read the Bible on one of these scenes, and it's very clear that he cannot read. Like it is, he's a poor white, also dealing with illiteracy at that time. Like it was a lot of, they could not read. So it was him trying to perpetuate that narrative and that message of, slaves obey your masters, that third. And we laughed about it in the movie theater, and I think it made white people uncomfortable, but it was absolutely hilarious because I think that's part of the gist. And especially I think if you put it into context, like some of the slaves could secretly read. So I think they knew like, this what you preaching is not that. Is that an oversight? Like, it's just interesting to me that like, as calculated as white people were about the transatlantic slave trade and holistically holding down a whole group of people, they did not account for the fact that somewhere in this story, in these multiple stories, that a liberation theology will be born out of that. What do we think that how did that happen?
I'm sorry. They also didn't take into consideration that brains had nothing to do with, their brain power was very strong. So some of those games they played, that trickster, making them think they could not read when all the time that they could. That was important to their culture and their faith, because they would give them the scripture that would keep them pressed down, and they would
out of context.
But they would flip the script on those same scripture and show how God worked for the people. So that fuels the foundation. It's the way we think anyway.
It's the way we think that people don't think
that we think
that way. It's being too
ahead. So do we think that is why, like when you talk about white supremacy, especially in this particular period, and like there's been slavery in other cultures and countries and whatever, but like this is one that is like wholly shaped in the idea of an inferiority, a God-given mandate that you are inferior, right? So I think, even when you look at so much of the science of the time, and like they was really trying to prove like these are livestock, their brains are shaped differently than ours. Like, there's like literally like you gotta, if you're gonna tell the lie, you gotta sell the lie. Like we gotta put it together on all parts and all tiers to really sell it, and have us sort of be spoon-fed inferiority, but yet at the same time, as you're trying to force feed us inferiority, this other thing is sort of rising up in juxtaposition to that, which I think is very, very interesting. Can you talk about some of the songs that have come out of
I want to say one
era?
thing before we go to the song, Jess, which is projection. You have a small brain, so you are projecting that I have a small brain. And this is something that we are still seeing here and now today with the way the country and the MAGA movement and this, that, and the other. All those things are still the same projection of you have to be dumber than me. You have to be Institutional gaslighting. I love that.
Institutional gaslighting.
You have to not be as intelligent as I am, because what would that mean if you were smarter than me? So
And what's that Toni Morrison quote? They say that they said it in Origin. I don't know if you saw that already on V, but they talk about it that it's a Toni Morrison quote where she was saying something to the effect of like white people knew all along that we were not inferior. They just
yeah,
decided like that this is what we was gonna do in terms of, in that movie they talk about caste, which is a whole another topic. But
Yes.
how to make this system work based on we got to make you think these things, even if they're not true. We know deep down they're a lie. Like
a
we've
lot of the
seen this happen time again.
Constitution, the way they wrote it was
Correct.
protectionism. For
For
if
white
this
men,
happens, then this is how we're gonna, circumvent that. You can only be 3/5 of a person, because we know that what has happened has happened.
yeah,
It you are smarter, and you do have more, and you can figure things out. And necessity is the mother of invention. You have
Speaking
to
of
figure
which,
it out
speaking of which, they knew we were smarter because they could not function without
without
our
us.
without
inventions.
us.
Without our
Correct.
inventions. So there was
Correct.
no way that they didn't already know. It's just that if I shape the narrative and spit it back at you a particular way, if I do
Mm,
that long enough, then maybe you'll believe it long enough to stay in this place that's comfortable for me. Because if you don't stay in a place that's
mm,
comfortable for me, then I have to deal with my discomfort. And my discomfort means that I have to come and think a whole nother way with a whole lot more people than it would take you in order to see it a different way, to shape it a different way. We're living it right now.
We're reliving. I don't think we ever stopped
We
living
never
it.
stop living, but we're
living
It
it.
living
went
Yeah.
it.
undercover
It's
for a
in
while.
technicolor
Yeah,
right
but
now.
now it's
Yeah.
big in living color again.
Yes.
All
And
right,
I
now
and
to the songs.
well, I was gonna say one more thing about that. And I think even at that time they knew that because there was a thing about, you know, in some states and places about these, gatherings of the slaves for church where like they were always afraid that a rebellion was gonna come out of them congregating that much. You know what I mean? Like there
Mm-hmm.
was a level of like we could go undercover. There was also like a whole lot of other stuff that was happening at those meetings. And in some cases they were right. I mean, like Nat Turner was he a Baptist preacher, I think?
Mm-hmm.
So,
John Brown.
he took and John Osawatomie Brown, who is a personal hero of mine. But yeah, these people who took on the mantle of liberation that is stated in the Gospels, and they got a little eye for an eye with it. But that's in there too. So it's like you can't be cherry picking what you want to use. Okay,
Absolutely.
so listen. So then, songs wise, what are some of the songs that the slaves were using to rebel during that time? That are
There were some particular ones that meant particular things.
mm,
For inspiration and to keep the uh, that fire going about freedom, those songs like "Did My Lord Deliver Daniel" would come up. Songs that said that freedom can be ours. Then you got
mm,
those that were absolutely the code song for what was going to happen at night, like "Steal Away" to
mm,
Jesus meant steal away to that place you knew where we were supposed to go to at night because it was time for the Underground Railroad to go.
mm.
Um, there were other songs that did that followed the drinking gourd. I remember
Or
that one
yeah,
particularly.
Swing Low.
Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, coming for to carry me home.
God's gonna
Those,
trouble the water. Yeah. That
yeah,
one too.
yep.
Wade in the
Wade in the
Water.
water. God's gonna trouble the water. Again, that was that place of, and the biblical story is that when the water was stirred, healing came. And so it
Mhm.
was they all of those songs spoke to biblical principles, which would throw the owners, the oppressor
Off,
off
off the scent. Yeah,
because it was like, oh, they got the story today. Oh yeah, we got it. We just flipped.
yeah. We just flipped it. Oh, I think we lost them. Do we lose them? Oh man, they'll come back. Yeah. I think that's really cool to hear, man. Like that just speaks to the ingenuity and the genius and the um amazing like resilience of our ancestors to be in complete bondage to these people and still be having codes. So, like playing the part, like literally doing all the things you're supposed to be doing, um, but also doing something sneaky on the low. You know what I mean? Doing something undercover, which just feels like us and for a greater good. It's not like doing sneaky things undercover for the sake of doing sneaky things undercover. It's like, nah, we pushing the freedom because we know in our hearts we're supposed to be free. These stories are telling us we're supposed to be free. Um, we not wrong, y'all wrong. You know what I mean? Which is super cool. Um, so hopefully they'll come back. Okay, so that's we did Africa. We've done the Middle Passage slavery era, right? And then we have post emancipation. Of course, Abe and them have freed the slaves. I think if you do enough of your own historical searching, you will find that Abe didn't just do that for his health and because he just was a goodly white man. There were a lot of political forces at play. Okay, I'm sorry if that burst someone's bubble, but Abe's hand was a little bit forced in that. Okay, when all the white Southerners were like, "Hey, homie, you can't take away our slaves. You know, we about to secede from the Union." It was a whole lot of pressure. Okay, like America as we know it, for better or for worse, would not be what it is, right? Because as much as the Northerners were um, not owning slaves and black people could be free there and all of that, and we know it gets complicated, right? Um, for the North to act like they did not holistically and fully depend on the economic resources of the South is bananas because they did. Cotton and tobacco were the primary industries of the Americas at that time. Um, it was being exported all over the world. Like somebody had to do that work, and we all know they wasn't about to do it. So, as much as the Northerners really, um, might have found the idea of enslavement barbaric um, in this period, in particular church denominations, like they really started putting people's hands to the fire about like, y'all just can't be out here owning people and then talking about you love God. Like at the same time, the two things don't really go together. And um, the church is really a part of the abolitionist movement in terms of making sure that people got out of that. And that just ain't black churches, it's white churches as well. They really were putting people's hands and feet to the fire to be like, so how does this work? Like you just up in here deciding that it's okay to own people um, whilst professing to love God, and people are under horrible, torturous, um, out of control living situations, which is also a part of the Underground Railroad, right? This sort of informal network of how do we get people out of this life and into a better life until good old Abe just broke the whole system wide open. Let me see. Y'all back? Y'all back? Almost. Okay. I'll give you a little time. Because I want to make sure we get Dr. V back in here. Um, so yeah, so now we are in emancipation. We've talked about this era several times, okay, in these last two episodes. And it is affectionately is not the right word. It is disturbingly called the era of terror. It's Jim Crow. This is millions of black people who were really never meant to not be slaves. Like I don't think we really think about that. Like a lot of what we're seeing right now, people have to understand. White people are really just some white people. I won't say all. I'm not gonna put y'all on the same boat. Certain white people are just really being themselves at the end of the day because they were never planning for black people to get away and be a non-enslaved group of people. That was never the plan. Like if they had their way, we would still be doing all the things we just described earlier to this day, okay, right now. And I think like really, this is why it's really important for us to just do historical context things before we start talking about like present day stuff, because history is under attack. But history is also under attack for a reason. Like people don't want you to know these kinds of things. They don't want you to have this kind of information, because that way it's easier to control your mind, control your brain, control your thoughts, control your outlook, control your algorithm. Like if they really got you out here thinking affirmative action is really taking something away from you, um, then they got you in a little bit of a tizzy, right? So I say all that to say, in the Jim Crow era, this is like white people's worst fears, like absolutely coming true. Like these people are free. I have treated them terribly for generations. Are they going to come back and kill me in the night? Some would say that is a justifiable means to said situation. People would say that makes absolute sense. Absolutely, do away with these people. They was rude to you. But what we find is Black people are not out here on the vengeance streets. They not out here doing the vengeance. They are happy to be free. They're happy to be making their own life decisions. They're trying to find their family members that have been sold off anywhere and everywhere. And they are trying to make a life for themselves economically. They're trying to use these skills that they've had to just leave us alone, as Michael Jackson once said. Just leave us alone. We just want to be our own people, and we want to not have to deal with you so much. But we talked about, I think last week we were talking about, especially with food, just economic jealousy is real. So I think a lot of the Jim Crow era stuff in terms of lynchings, we all know Black people was making it do what it do even then, like we making it do what it do now, in terms of entrepreneurship, really on that, pulling ourselves up by bootstraps, living in these communities where we could all help each other, especially coming out of slavery with places to live and food and literacy and education, all these things that we never had access to before. So you have a lot of northern churches coming to aid Black Southerners to be like, hey, let's help you. Let's figure some things out. Now there's a little classism divide in experience as well, but that kind of goes without saying because people are people. But let me see if I can bring them back in here for this. Y'all back?
We're back.
We making it do what it do with this technology. We will not be thwarted. Go ahead.
We've been listening to you. This is what I wanted to go back and just grab in this era. Between 1870 and 1905 or so, most of our historical Black colleges and universities came into being, and many of those started in Black churches.
Ooh.
Because that was the place that no one could bother us. So safe space to have the think tank and to bring those persons who were able to be the learners and the teachers and the people who could bring them to. A lot of people had school in the church house on 9 Sundays or 9, whatever they had prayer meeting. And so that was the place where those schools were birthed. And that became another thing to be subversive in a culture that said, not only can't you have this, but you can't learn and your brain is small. It was, no, we're going to prove you wrong. And teachers set out to do that. And your Sunday school teacher might have been your teacher.
Facts.
So that's important, especially in that time period, where you got these churches that are all really the beginnings of these churches. I don't know if you talked about Richard Allen.
I did not.
Okay.
I did not.
And that in itself is the cutest little, I'm gonna give you the short version of the story. Richard Allen and Absalom Jones were in the church and they were allowed to be in the balcony. And
of the white
church, they were able to come down for altar call and then go back to the balcony. They were praying and they were praying obviously too long. And so they told them they had to go back to the balcony. And what they did is they went to the balcony, and everyone who walked in with them got up and walked out. And the AME church is what came out of that.
Mm.
That time of saying, nope, you're gonna stop me from praying.
Yeah, that's crazy.
And so they started the AME church from there. Yeah. So
we still have
of the others. Yeah.
Okay. So there's a lot of subversive things happening in the church consistently. It ain't all what it seems to be on the surface, which is pretty cool. So yeah, so we have,
That's all we had.
Facts.
For the most part, it's all we really still have. But that's a whole nother workshop
discussion, which we will get to. Okay, I think that this is like a basic overview of that time period. But in the Jim Crow era, Black people was coming together, making it do what it do. Serving each other in community, education, helping each other really just get on our feet, which I feel like is really something that we still do to this day. As much terror and horror as came out of, I would say, slavery and the Jim Crow period, I think it's really, in a horrible and beautiful way, bonded us as people because we was literally all we got, okay, in those time periods. All right, so now we fast forward a little bit.
And Jess, and we talked about the Great Migration last week. So especially after people had migrated from the South and felt like they lost that connection, being in the Southern church, being able to recreate that community and that feeling and that environment in a Northern situation was really very comforting and very supporting as well.
So now, and then I also want to make this point. So I was reading something today that also during this period, as much as there were like missionaries and people that were trying to help people get on their feet, there's a little bit of a, like I said, a little class divide, or I guess a north-south divide about like how church should be done, because the Southerners were very, they came out of traditions that are a little more boisterous, a little more loud, a little more drumming, a little more dancing, a little more catching the Holy Ghost, versus in the North, everything is a little more Caucasoid, a little more uppity,
Episcopalian, Presbyterian,
a little more. We have to behave
persnickety,
appropriately,
bourgeoisie.
Yeah, and so that there is a little divide, and I'm sure that just wasn't with Black people. I'm sure white people probably had them issues too, but that there's a little of like that friction between.
Part of that's education and money. So education, yes, because Southern education, it's the WB and Booker T thing.
Booker T.
It's that same divide. Those who were Northern were of the WB ilk.
Talented 10.
The talented 10.
Da, 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 da.
Those in the South were more
agriculture,
grassroots. Booker T. And there was that, the trick of intra-racial issues. Okay. The trick.
Divide and conquer.
Those were the places where you couldn't get in certain churches if you were darker than the paper bag.
The church too? I knew
colorism,
but I didn't know the churches were like that.
Do you know how mad I would? Do you know how mad I'd be if I got dressed for church and then I came in and they was like, "Nah, bro, you
just didn't go to that. You didn't get to go to that church.
That's annoying.
A particular look. That's real. That's real stuff.
This is why we have to get rid of colorism. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. But
that's why I said, but intra-racial racism was also a residual effect of slavery, post-slavery, Jim Crow. It's that those who looked a particular way were in the big house. Those who weren't were in the field. It's all of that carried over once people even migrated north.
And that's really us ingesting the poison at this point. It's like white people don't really have to do. White supremacy has again transformed. It was like, you don't need a master and an overseer. Y'all got it. You know what I mean? Now it's transformed into.
It was a psychological setup.
Yeah, your own version of this within yourself, which also has to do with caste. That's the whole thing, whole
Yep.
other thing. And yeah, and they were saying also, I never really thought about the like literacy part of it and the education part of it, and that they were saying that in the North everything was more based on like following the text of the word and being able to read it and break it down and understand it, whereas the South, they might not have been as necessarily learned with the literacy part, so everything was a lot more
Emotion.
emotionalism, a lot more using faith to get you through, not so much head knowledge or theological understanding or any of those kind of
Correct.
things at that time.
Correct.
Which brings
That's
us to the
interesting.
80s and 90s, which we're going to get to in a minute.
But let's talk about the civil rights era. I think there's probably no era greater that the Black church had. Really, I want to say like it's thumb on the pulse of the world, really, at that point, because of all of the leaders that came out that time. And even I want to say the infighting between the faiths, right? We know all the Malcolm and Martin struggles, but everybody was still, again, that's the smoke and mirrors situation of like everybody's really fighting for the same thing. It just look a little different, but in the way that we feel like we should get it. But everybody's looking for freedom and equality. And even, I think especially, when Malcolm, once he took the pilgrimage and started to understand the faith in a different way, he even started to change transitions a little bit. And I think anytime I really read anything about Martin, obviously the faith inspired most of what he did, right? And all the teachings on nonviolence, and just the organization that it took, that a lot of that happened in Black churches. I don't know if anybody else has seen Rustin, but they really talk about just the strategicness of what it took to actually pull a lot of these things off, and that a lot of those meetings happen in churches, in people's houses. You know what I mean? Big Mamas is frying up chicken in the kitchen. They're selling dinners. They're doing all of those things that are
Money, all
necessary
the
to
things.
help
Yep.
raise money for the movement, and doing meetings there and all that kind of stuff. And a lot of the marches would start at churches or end at churches. That those were like medical centers sometimes if things went left. So what can you bestow on us about the Black church in the civil rights era?
Everybody wasn't happy, and every church wasn't in it.
Yeah, that was amazing too.
And so I'm gonna drop names because he gone. J.H. Jackson, who was the president of the National Baptist Convention, did not receive what Martin was doing, what Dr. King was doing. He fought against it and made it very difficult for those pastors in those member churches who didn't just say
that convention, which is why they had another one.
Which is which is why the Boyd Convention and the Progressive National Convention comes out of that fight. I had
forgotten about that.
So you got all of that going on.
More fighting.
So now you got different Baptist conventions, because one Baptist convention does not agree with anything having to do with liberation and all that.
Civil rights.
Nice.
And I personally believe that was an economic stronghold. But that's just my thinking, and a lot of it was jealousy.
So when you say economic stronghold, are you saying that these institutions may have been receiving funding behind the scenes from white organizations or things like that?
I'm saying it's economic because they're people who are usually given to their church.
Got it. Okay.
It's now given to this movement.
Yeah.
And so
it's real economic jealousy.
That sets up a whole nother issue. And there is some envy and some jealousy that's in the midst of all of this. Because who does this young upstart think he is?
At 26.
At
26.
Yeah. He had, you hadn't kissed the ring, so to speak.
And then you got the, persnickety churches who have money and they're not wanting to get involved economically because they're afraid of what that might mean to their personal pockets.
Yes.
So you got economic issues on both sides.
And the fact that there is actual literal threat of bodily harm. I think people always
That
Absolutely.
part.
sort of like
Absolutely.
wash over that part, but like, you know, a lot of
Bodily
civil rights
harm,
stuff
death.
popped off. Yeah, popped off after Emmett Till, which is a very like terrible thing to happen, right? So people are worried about their kids. Um,
16th Street.
you got yeah, 16th Street, you got the bombing of the little girls, you got Medgar
Yeah.
Evers getting assassinated. Like there's all actual um bodily harm that can actually happen to people. So, you know, I think we like to like glamorize and romanticize that period, but for the people that weren't involved with it, it makes sense. Like if you it's not a good look for history later, but it's like, okay, I could get it. Some people just couldn't, they weren't willing to make the sacrifices necessary
And
for
those
that
same
kind of struggle.
songs came back. Those same
Facts.
songs
Yeah.
came back to reiterate the free for two reasons. One, to give inspiration for freedom that could come, but to also remind that freedom did come.
What you gonna do with it?
What you gonna do with it? Freedom came. What are you gonna do with the freedom you received?
Ain't
in
gonna
order
let
to
nobody
go,
turn me around.
Turn me around.
Keep on walking.
Keep on talking, walking up to freedom land.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
That's fact.
oh freedom. Before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free.
Yeah. And I think, and now that you say that, I also think about like the, because there was major losses. Like, you know what I mean? I think about like the little girls that got killed in the church bombing, and
Yeah.
like it's a
Freedom
lot of
fighter.
funerals. You know what I mean? It's a lot of death is very real. It's a lot of, you know, people standing up for the right to vote in these smaller rural towns. So I think having those songs and those sermons and all of those things to really hold on to remind you of that we were free before. Like we've been through worse, right? We've been through hard times. Uh-oh. We've been through hard.
Sorry.
It's okay. We've been through hard times before, right? And we overcame and God showed up for us. And so we're crying out to that same God again to ask us to ask him to free us again in this new iteration of really the same fight at the end of the day. It is new iteration of the exact same fight. And I think that probably people's faith was definitely up and down because, you know, they're wanting all these amazing things to happen and this breakthrough to happen and liberation to happen for their people again, but it's not without counting up the cost, and the cost is really really high at this time. So I think because I sometimes I used to be like, why was they going to church like all the time, like, you know what I mean, especially if you're a kid that grew up in church. That don't y'all was at They was at church all the time, but it makes sense because I would imagine that people's faith needed to be restored. I would imagine that, you know, after your friend got killed this week in said March, or is in the hospital because they got cracked over the head with a baton or water hose too hard or chewed up by a dog, you know what I mean? Like you might want to be at the altar that Sunday. You know what I mean? You might need a little extra pick me up in your faith because you really are going up against flesh and blood evil. You know what I mean? We talk about principalities and things in high places, but like this is a embodiment of that. So it makes sense that like people will be in church consistently at that time, not just to organize and strategize, but also to be uplifted and reaffirmed in their faith.
Right.
You guys are back. Sorry for that.
Yeah.
It happened.
Fumble.
Fumble. Anything else y'all want to add to that?
I think.
Except,
Yeah.
oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No,
I was just gonna say to talk about Black liberation theology.
Yeah, that's where I was headed.
She's talking about
yeah,
that.
yeah. I don't
That's
want
where
to
I was headed. So the answer on the other side of the death of Dr. King, the assassination, of Dr. King,
of everyone.
and
Everyone.
there was this lull because, and I won't go into all the details, but there was this lull because there had been such a crusade with this person who was the leadership. Yeah. And then all of a sudden, no one knew what to do with who we were except to, cry out to go prophetic and cry out to a God and say, how long, God? How long, Lord? How long must we keep going through this? Yeah. And but in the meantime,
and just think about whether you are Martin or Malcolm. Now they both gone.
They both
you know
gone.
What I'm saying? They're both gone.
White supremacy doesn't care. Y'all asking for freedom and equality. Everybody can get these bullets.
But here's the undercurrent. While this is going on, new preachers are going to school. And they're going to school with a different mindset because they've had a Martin, they've had a Malcolm, they've had, even an Adam Clayton Powell. They've had them as their prototype, their mentor, whether they were close enough to them that way or not. And so what they start to do is to deconstruct what went wrong.
Like a forensic scientist?
Yes.
But a faith.
One of those persons who did that deconstruction was a theologian named James Cone. And what James Cone said was what we were missing was the merging of Martin and Malcolm.
That's what I've always said. I said they was really praying for the same team.
But of their thought process. So when you take the faith tradition of a Martin, but you take the practical, pragmatic, how do we not take it anymore mindset of
any means necessary
of a Malcolm, and you construct a theology that deals with all of that, you come up with Black liberation theology.
Which is, can you explain further?
Is the knowledge that God, and it comes from Thurman too, who was Dr. King's mentor, who reminded us at every turn that Jesus cared for the disinherited
and the oppressed.
That Jesus, that if you look at Jesus's ministry all the way across the board, Jesus was always a champion for those who were the disinherited, the oppressed. And that was us. And so that meant that Jesus intended for our liberation, just like he healed the sick, raised the dead, liberated those
came to set the captives free.
That's what Jesus says in Luke 4. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, for he's anointed me to, and to set the captives free. And so that was inclusive of us, as Cone would say, and that it was inclusive of the Black particular man at that point. Particularly man was used.
Well, yeah, that's a whole. We haven't really talked.
Yeah.
The exclusion of women who.
Well, there's an answer to it that comes through, but it's okay. So but Cone's point was that you can't teach me about faith in a Christ that doesn't include Jesus as liberator.
I would agree. It makes me actually wonder what do white Christians be doing, but maybe they don't. They don't have a Black liberation. They don't have a liberation lens. I think maybe they just
don't have
Jesus
a liberation need.
They don't have a liberation need.
Exactly. So I'd be like, I don't really know what y'all be doing on Sundays, actually, except crying out to God for being terrible under this white supremacist system. If you even recognize it, I just don't know what you be asking Jesus to do.
Really, really big on grace. It's a lot of grace.
I would be too if I had done what I've done to the planet. I would be big on grace too because you're in need of it. But I just feel like the
grace, mercy, love, forgiveness, and let's not keep talking about that.
Annoying. I don't know. I don't get it.
Grace without penitence is cheap.
One more time for the people in the back.
Grace without penitence is cheap.
So white people are practicing the cheap Christianity, is what you say?
Cheap. They're living on cheap grace because there's no repentance.
If only you can say it.
Discount.
Listen, let's tell the
off
people,
brand.
Let's tell the people right now, we're going to be here a little longer than normal tonight because this is
we
big
are.
and we have big guests. So settle in, strap in if you can. If not, we understand.
If you
We're
gotta
gonna
go,
ride
catch you on
this
the
to the
replay.
end. Okay. It's like at
Okay.
church. We're gonna close about 2 more times.
We're not gonna close about 2 more times. I don't believe in that. We're gonna keep going, and then when we done, we're gonna be
We'll
done.
be
And if
done.
you can hang, you can hang. And if you can't, you can't. It happens. Okay. Okay, so white people are practicing cheap grace. Black liberation theology emerges from this place.
So let
And
me say these 2 things about the 70s before we move into
no,
The
we're
80s
fine.
and the
80s, the shift. So second thing about the 70s, during the 70s, a wonderful writer comes to the literary scene. Her name is Alice Walker. And Alice Walker determines that there is a, whenever you are reading literature, you're reading it from a lens. And so that lens, that theory that you're reading it from is based on what you see in the text. So she came up with a womanist theory, literary.
Yeah.
Okay. And so then a Jacqueline Grant and a Dolores Williams and a few other female theologians, many who are, and I would name some more names, but I don't want to mess them up and forget names. But anyway, please look these people up.
Google is your friend. Google is your friend.
They came up with a womanist theology because the womanist theology did this. It did what Black theology could not do and what feminist theology could not do.
We really don't have time to get into white feminism.
I'm just gonna, so what white feminist theology was the pushback against patriarchy.
Which they still be doing, and I'd be like, girl, okay.
Black liberation theology was the pushback against racism, oppression, but neither one of them embodied the Black woman experience.
Copy that.
The womanist theology deals with the oppression of racism and sexism and how the word of God speaks to those things as well.
That's dope.
Okay.
Probably one of my favorite womanist theologians, I would say, is Candace Marie Bimbo. We've talked about her on this podcast a few times before, but yeah, she's the person I just know that I listen to that be talking about this. But thank you for that context. But continue.
The historical context
of
Candace.
Of where she comes, someone like her comes from, because the patriarchy.
There's a Renita Williams out here who's doing the same thing, has been for years. And there are others. Please know there are others. Please look them up.
And I think that's important because Black women really be supporting the church, like the Black church specifically. Like that. I know we didn't talk
too, but pushing back too. And and I think that's what's important is that Black women didn't abandon the church, but they pushed back. Yeah. It's like, I'm gonna stay here, but you're gonna hear me.
Which is African. We did talk about that on the first. Which is African. We talked about that on the first episode that we did this month about Black love. And we were talking about how there was patriarchy in Africa. There were these systems that were oppressive to Black women even then. And not that they necessarily did anything to they're not gone. They didn't get rid of them, but they would absolutely be like, that's wrong. Or we don't agree with that. Or what is this? You know what I mean? So I think that is an inherently, that's how an African thread continues to come through, even all this white supremacist foolishness on top of it, to be able to be like, well, where are we in this conversation? As we've been holding down this movement and all these men and all these things and taking the brunt of a lot of this violence and disenfranchisement and all that kind of stuff. So I think that's super important. So you look like you're.
I agree. One more thing about the 70s is important as we segue into the 80s and the 90s.
Segue.
In the 70s, after the civil rights movement, after the change of those civil rights, they became law, but not change of heart.
Mm-hmm.
There were a lot
Correct.
of white preachers who felt like they needed to soothe their souls,
Absolve
and they
themselves.
started connecting and reaching out to Black churches, especially in the North, reaching out to Black churches and saying, y'all come and let's integrate together.
How very Black Lives Matter of y'all.
But here's the bamboozlement of it. What it did was it took
it's like integration all the time.
The tenets of the Black church and made them look small and inferior, because it took us from what we thought were our big churches and took us across town to these magnanimous complex churches, complex campuses. That's when that first started being talked about. And so it made us come back to our places with a level of insecurity and inferiority.
And shame.
And set in motion a be like Mike that made us abandon the things that made us us in order to be more like what we saw them do.
Now, what I say every episode, don't I say white supremacy be shape-shifting better than the transformer? That is a prime example. White supremacy shouldn't even be in the faith space, but yeah, here they come. Like, we want to make amends. We want to absolve
and we want to make you
we
better.
So bad.
Listen,
we want to make you better.
I'm thinking about Greenleaf and what's the church? Harvest, whatever that church was that came to try to take over Greenleaf.
Girl, I don't remember, but yeah, I know what you're talking
about. You know what I'm talking about?
I do.
Harvest
hope and harmony and hope.
Harmony and hope. Mm-hmm. That's kind of when all that
all of that started happening, when the concept of mega churches even began, was in churches like we came through that time. And so Temple Baptist, which was humongous. We had never seen anything like it. They bring us in, they teach us this generic gospel, and then
it wasn't a generic gospel, it was more a generic form of worship.
Okay, I say generic gospel because there was never any concept of what real inclusion mattered. So so therefore it was generic. It was Jesus loves you, which is absolutely truth.
Cheap Christianity and cheap
but grace. It did not speak to our coming together as being what God
There's no
repentance. There's no repentance. There's just soothe your soul, put some salve on it, and have the little Black children come sing with the little white children.
Dr. King's dream.
Oh, that made my hair stand up.
On your pulpit.
I remember the feeling of standing in that choir stand where they brought our, like you said, the little Black children over to sing with all the white children. And they let Wanda lead a solo. It just was, it didn't feel right then, but you didn't know why it didn't.
You didn't know why. It felt bad, but you didn't know why you felt bad.
Yeah.
And it's weird because it's like colonization all over again. You now are living inside of somebody's white dream of spirituality. Like, this is cool if that's what y'all want to do, but y'all need to but this don't have nothing to do with nothing that we be dealing with on a regular basis at the hands of people that look like you. You just want us to come in here and kumbaya and la 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 with you every week.
That song
and turn around and come back to the inner city, to the urbanist part of the
missionary work, colonization 2.0. But go ahead.
But bring you back to which we thought was at the top of the food chain. That's the hard part of this. We were feeling some kind of good about where we were. As we
always are. And then white people be like, y'all can't have nothing without us. We always do. We always get to a point where we doing good. We not thinking about you. What's that woman said that was talking about all the crisis between Ukraine and Russia? We was doing good. We was working on ourselves. We not worried about you. And then here come your ex that coming back, you looking good, they want you back. It's just annoying. It's like, when y'all gonna leave us alone? That's all we really wanted, was for you to
All we've
leave us
ever
alone.
wanted.
So now we in the mega church, we in the charismatic, evangelical,
Basis.
80s and 90s prosperity situation.
Faith-based, name it and claim it, all the things.
So I was a youngin'. I
Also,
remember I came up in the Kenneth Copeland Super Kids era. I remember being like forced to speak in tongues, damn near, like they wouldn't let you leave.
Damn
So
near.
then you just kind of ended up like faking it a little bit, just so you can leave, because everybody's eating pizza or doing something fun, and they would just be really making you tarry there, even though they had no control over it. But I yeah, I'm non-denominational. I grew up in some white churches, but I think I think because of our family and like grandpa, like being a black preacher, I think I just have a certain
You never
level
grew
of
up in a
spiritual
white church.
DNA.
You visited white churches. You
Okay,
didn't
go ahead,
grow
girl.
up in a white church.
Okay.
We never belonged to a white church.
It felt like I grew up in a white church because we was always out of Kenneth Copeland something. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he feels like my white granddad that betrayed me.
I know, I will.
But shout out to Commander Kelly and them. They came out with some bop albums. I feel like they did kind of give me foundational faith. They had a black kid in it every now and then, like the
Yeah.
Power Rangers. But yeah, I think it's a lot of like white context. But I guess no, we did not belong to.
But that comes from what we just got finished talking about.
Yeah.
We bought the farm. We drank that Kool-Aid.
The Kool-Aid.
And
Crazy.
said, we don't need to sing these burden slave songs anymore. We don't need
yeah,
to
you
sing
don't need to
about
sing them.
how we got over. We're
over. Let's elevate this experience. And I think
is that why I hate CCM music? Like I'm not the hymnal girl, but I hate CCM. Like it just me and Brandon talk about this all the time. Like it's all like your thunder, your mercy, your love, Lord. Like it's all very annoying to me.
I think that we got to, I know for me, and this is, of course, then trickle down to you. I got to a point in my faith where I felt like there was something more that I didn't understand about, the Baptists didn't believe in the Holy Spirit necessarily moving with the evidence of speaking in tongues and all that. So I started watching Catherine Kuhlman when I was really young, and Google her and you'll see. But the fact
sidebar, Catherine Kuhlman is a little spooky. I'm just trying to tell you right now. I know
she is.
So I'm just saying for the people that's gonna Google her, you're gonna see a white woman.
She's a little spooky.
She's a pasty white woman with some wild hair. She used to begin. You gonna hear some things about her. Everybody has a past. Okay, everybody she done gone through some things, but the Holy Spirit would be really moving through her. I just want to prepare you to be like, why would Pam tell us to look up this scary looking white woman? I'm just letting you know. She's a very powerful person. She did some great things spiritually, but I'm just letting you know when you see her, you're gonna be like, this can't be who she's talking about. But go ahead.
That got to be my thing. My thing, not so much the dynamics and the physical part of the church, but just internally, I kept thinking, I've been hearing the same types of sermons. I've been having the same kinds of experience.
Boredom.
In my church life as long as I can remember.
And is this it?
Is there anything more? And so you start to read, you start to look around and whatever. And then, so that's how the charismatic movement, Catherine Kuhlman, the miracles, this, that, and the other. I'm saying.
Oh, it got exciting. Benny Hinn. Okay, yeah, I get it. I see what you're saying.
The Jesus in the Bible was doing miracles. I didn't necessarily see that many miracles like that in the Black church. So
because we were too busy trying.
They was giving you spectacle. They was giving you show. They was giving you righteous.
It's Maslow's hierarchy of needs in the church.
Yeah.
If you worrying about how am I going to put food on the table? How am I going to feed my kids? How am I going to do that? That is your miracle. That right there is your miracle, and you are experiencing that, and you're good. But because our family was not in that position, I started to think, okay, where's the next level miracle? Like this, my basic needs are met. Where's the next level spiritual miracle that I can experience in my life? So then it became Campus Crusade Ministries and all these different things that we were going to, again, white-based, but because they didn't have to worry about need-based stuff, their experiences with God were on a different level. And I wanted to experience that level of spirituality.
So it's almost like white privilege and faith. It's like,
yeah, a little bit.
There's a spiritual experience that they're never going to connect to because they don't have to, because
exactly.
They haven't been systematically disenfranchised all this time. Nobody should really be asking God for the basics because he's just going to provide them. But y'all have set up a system that's what people be using God's time for.
So the flip side, but the other side of that is that with the Black church, because the focus was on getting past those struggles, when those of us who were not feeling like those struggles were part of our lives, we began to the post-slavery mindset.
Our history, you mean?
but saying things like, we don't need to sing no slave songs anymore because God is good. We need to be praising God. We spend all our time in church talking about what we going through and how hard it is, and is God gonna get us through this? When if we're gonna really believe what we say we believe, we ought to just be praising God in advance for what it is we know God is gonna do. Okay, and it was a shift in the theological mindset of the Black church for those who have been exposed to more, who were not. It's still happening now. You got some churches where, those basic needs are not being met. You got a church with 50 people in it, 35 of them are single mothers.
Yeah,
there's a different way of having church for a church with 35 single mothers,
right,
than ministering to the needs of a church where you got 300 people and 200 of them have advanced degrees.
Yeah, I would hope you wouldn't be treating those types of people the same way.
Evolution of the church, as we say this topic is tonight, has a lot to do with the evolution of a people.
Correct. Or the lack of evolution of a people.
Or the lack of.
Which I think is really the point.
Yeah.
So that brings us to where we are right now. Okay. This is Create Generational Wellness. I think we wanted to do this topic. I mean, because it's Black History Month. I think the African American experience is very tightly tied to the church, whether you believe or not, whether you still go or not. Like, I feel like everybody pretty much grew up in some form of church format.
Listen, when Snoop put out that gospel album, I was like, okay, all bets are off.
We love Uncle Snoop. What are you talking about? Uncle Snoop has always loved the Lord. I mean, he was doing some things, but he always loved the Lord. Because his mother was like a big shot in the church in LA.
Oh, yeah.
So we're in like a weird place. Some of us are raised in church, some of us still go, some of us don't. Some people are not raising their kids in the church at all.
3 generations that haven't.
3 generations that have not. I think that I don't want to say that's been the moral compass for Black people, because I don't know. I think we sometimes know the right thing to do, but I don't know if it's having an effect on the moral fiber of the people for 3 said generations. So I don't know. I feel like what'd you say?
I'm gonna say yes. I feel like it's having an effect on the moral fiber to a certain
in terms of You mean
And just,
just basic, like?
yeah, just in
'Cause
terms of
I
there's
think
no
most humans,
baseline.
they know right and wrong. Now, some of these things are spiritual tenets. But I agree with I hear what you're saying in terms of like if you don't have no baseline, then anything goes. You know what I mean? Or you can make a justifiable reasoning that anything goes. Um, I don't know. I guess the question is like moving forward. I don't know that it's necessarily important that people that the church that we had come back, but I do think we are in
No, I don't think
a
that's
place
where we.
a places as the black church that we've never really been before. Um,
Mhm.
in terms of we've I don't know that we've ever had three generations that haven't grown up in
Black
the church
people
at
that,
all.
right.
Black people that ain't never you take them to church, they don't know no songs, they don't know no Bible stories, they don't know nothing. That's crazy to me. But I'm an old millennial. Um, I think we're seeing a lot of cross section about racially, continual racial awakenings. Um, Not necessarily for those that are tapped in, but I think it's a lot of black kids that are not growing up in black context. So
Correct.
I know as a former youth teacher, a lot of the things aside from spiritual tenets that people said that I gave them was an ability to be proud to be black because they were growing up in very
White space.
white context and feeling inferior about that.
Because you were a
So
youth pastor at a suburban church.
that was black predominantly. So yeah, I think there's like a racial identity component to it. I think Um, again, addressing the womanist elephant in the room, there have been many denominations that have stopped women from preaching or having roles of leadership and being in position, which I think people are not having no more. And then there's a lot of reckoning around sexuality and the spectrum of
Mhm.
sexuality. It's like
Mhm.
you're not just
Mhm.
gonna have the gay man leading the choir, but can't get married at the church that they serve in. Like, you know what I mean? It's just a lot of things. It's a lot of stuff we haven't had to deal with.
Reconciled.
Yeah, it's a lot of things that people have chosen to, and these aren't new things, but it's just like these are generations of people that I think are very much more open minded, very much more um, willing to accept. It's like we got friends that are gay, they should be able to come to church with us, like, and not be offended. Like we have friends who are maybe trans or pansexual or bi, and it's like, listen, we understand the tenets of the faith, the tenets of the faith, but if somebody is trying to connect to God in a real authentic way, then these should not be hurdles or barriers to entry. So, as a person who is actively pastoring on multiple platforms, technological and otherwise, in these spaces with thought leaders of faith. Like, what are the conversations that you're having about this? Because it seems like a conundrum. But I think it also speaks to a little bit of that freedom and that liberation that we've had as Black people, that we have been able to take our spiritual destinies into our own hands. And just our life decisions about family and sexuality and all these things that like our ancestors did not really have. They wouldn't even think about this wasn't even on the spectrum of things to be thinking about. So anything you have to talk
That's it's
about, I'm
all
sure
very loaded, and that's why I'm trying to just get my thoughts to be as salient as possible. Um,
it's
I
super
have
loaded.
a set of preacher friends who are extremely progressive, and so
Mm,
therefore we don't make a lot of differentiations where other
More
clergy, more
traditional
traditional clergy do. Yet we're in a traditionally,
denomination.
you know,
interesting.
situated denomination.
Mm,
Um, and so with that, and having in our midst 6 generations on any given Sunday,
dang,
those
sick.
who are Alpha, Z,
Yep.
and Y,
Millennial.
who are accepting of all things.
Mm,
You got X who really doesn't know, but they're the parents of the Z's and the Alphas.
mm,
And then you've got those above it, those baby boomers, those silent generations, who really just want the Bible taught.
Right.
And so
But do they?
I mean, some thinkers,
Yeah.
the Bible,
But do
that which makes them comfortable in their faith.
Right.
Discomfort is problematic. And
Okay.
so, from the vantage point that I find myself dealing with, is that I preach Jesus. And when you preach Jesus, you're going to
Trying
get
hit
all of it,
everybody.
whether y'all
Hopefully
want
hit
it or
everybody.
not.
Yeah.
And, you know, there are those who want to lean on Old Testament. I had a conversation yesterday, who want to lean on Old Testament and yet be free in Jesus. Well, we got to move in this direction.
I'll say you ain't gonna qualify off the Old Testament. Ain't none of us gonna
Right, none
qualify
of
off
us
the Old
will.
Testament.
And so I guess what I'm trying to say is that it is not only a conundrum for the masses to look at, it's a conundrum inside the church.
Mm.
You know, we got a whole denomination that is based in its caucasity from its inception, that is now splitting into broken pieces everywhere over the issue of homosexuality and LGBTQIA inclusion. But this is the same denomination that didn't deal with its Black people when that should have been dealt with. It put them in jurisdictions so they could make their own decisions. And by doing so, one of those jurisdictions was able to ordain a openly gay married Black bishop. Okay. And in doing so, it set the whole church upside down. Now, it's not the church that I'm a part of, but it put people in the motion of feeling like they had to make these statements about what their denomination believes. And then you end up putting your preachers, who are also not all straight, in a position where they are teaching, believing, and walking in a protocol and polity antithetical to their authenticity.
Which, what does God really care about more, do we think? Like, that just...
What does God require?
That you
love
one another.
justice.
Oh yes, love justice. I was like, it's justice, right?
Be merciful.
Do good
and walk humbly with your God. That is
them
what
is
God,
really the top three. Them is really the top three.
I mean, that's Micah 6:8. What does God require?
Yep.
Yeah.
And
all
so,
the rest of that is your personal business. It really is.
all
Like,
the rest of it is an amalgamation of what everybody thinks that they meant
and has meant over the last 400 years.
And so I get in trouble with my private theology when it becomes public, like right now. But I'm over it.
Not over here, you not.
Right, but I'm just saying, when you're private, and Dr. King used to talk about that all the time, that his private theology and his public theology,
two different things.
There was a wrestling. And so my public theology is that I'm a part of a denomination. So I present this. But my private theology is that the only thing that is the same in every religion that exists except Taoism is the tenet of love. And if we could get there, then we get to Jesus. Because Jesus says what? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, your mind, your soul, and your strength. And the second one is likened to it. Love your neighbor as yourself. If I'm going to love my neighbor, I'm loving my neighbor no matter where my neighbor is, no matter what my neighbor believes, no matter who my neighbor loves. If I'm loving my neighbor, then love your neighbor. Our job as preachers is to cast the net on the water. I don't have a knife. I don't have the capacity to fillet, do any of that. It's not my job. My job is to speak life. And when our church gets back to a place where speaking life, doing life, knowing that we are providing things that help people have life is our focus, we won't have to worry about 3 generations not showing up. Because the truth is that Ys, Zs, and Alphas don't think church should be anything but what we do for others.
That's true.
So you want to
And
grow your church? Do.
Do stuff. Yeah.
You want to keep the history of our church strong? Do.
Yeah.
Because that's what separated us from everything else.
Mm-hmm.
You knew that the bastion of hope for your life was when you got to that church every Sunday. Yeah, it was shenanigans. Always been shenanigans. Shenanigans not new.
Gangs.
But at the core, every need was met.
Mm.
Physical, social,
educational, health care wise, financial. Most people learned about investments not from the stock market, but from the church.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's how we got things. We learned investment.
How to economically empower ourselves.
Economic development.
Yep. Initiatives and financial literacy.
Entrepreneurship.
Program.
We got caught up in the bamboozlement of let me just wave my hand and wait for God to give me everything that it is that I desire. We ATM'd God.
Mm-hmm.
And we lost identity.
Facts.
So we need the spiritual therapy of the Holy Spirit.
Hello.
Therapist to remind us of our identity.
Yeah. Big facts.
And then we don't have to worry about any more nuns and duns. It's a term that F. Douglas Poe came up to talk about those who are the nuns, those who've never been to church, and those who are the duns. I'm done with that.
I
love There's God. A lot of nuns.
Love God,
I'm tired of this church.
I'm tired of this church.
Yeah.
There's a lot of nuns and duns. And I think that's beautifully stated. I think the other thing we said we're going to talk about was just in terms of Black churches in general. One of the things they're also facing is gentrification. Because so many of our neighborhoods that used to just be our neighborhoods are now everybody named Mama's neighborhoods. And so people are priced out of being able to stay in those neighborhoods and maintain those churches and continue to give or serve. Or they what?
Sold them.
Or they ran.
And then the churches are forced to sell the buildings and maybe move somewhere else. But gentrification is a real thing that's causing, some shifting again in the culture and the landscape of the church. And we have to figure that out,
I can count the families.
Are you frozen?
She is frozen. I can count the families in the neighborhood of the church that I pastor on one hand. Everybody's a commuter.
Everybody, which makes it hard to have a sense of community that's not just a Sunday community. So we're talking about
because nobody lives in the community.
Nobody lives in the community.
Coming from other places.
So that makes it hard to continue that mission. You have to work really hard at it, which is good, which is why the digital whole thing is helpful because,
Correct.
the hybrid model after, COVID and all that and pulling that all back together and making it where you meet on Zoom and where you can have community groups small groups that meet on Zoom or this, that, and that. Again, it's using the digital technology now to foster that sense of community and look at where we're going next.
The great blessing of COVID-19 that most people don't see. And people kept saying, well, we're going back to church. Why aren't you coming back to church? Because some people that was their out. They didn't really want to be around these people anyway, but they loved the church.
I was gone like
So they
several years
stay
before that.
online with the
Yeah.
church. And what we have to do, here's the other thing the Black church has to do, the traditional Black church has to do, is to stop seeing this digital
as a threat,
as not only a threat, but as something that's just for people to watch as if they're watching TV. Because just like if they're only watching you like they're watching TV, just like TV, they will use the remote and keep going. We have to find a way to connect digitally in a way that lets them know that they are not just spectators.
Mm-hmm. It has to be an e-church.
There has to be an e-church. And it's one of the hardest things to do because it was a means to an end. And to now
for a lot of people.
For a lot of people. Well, I mean, there were some who were doing it before that
Yeah,
happened.
because Jessica was a member of an e-church.
And so what ends up happening is that if we can know that the next stage again. Okay, the next level for churchdom is to say, we develop that digital platform. And each church becomes real, that you are a church in two locations, even though that location is just a camera.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Have to make it real.
Got to make it real.
All right. We don't know.
I think we're back. I don't know what's happening, y'all. Anyway, sometimes the technology just be in our way. Can you believe it? Let me try one more time. Nope. Anyway, yeah, thank you so much.